Amazing. So great, everyone. I'm very glad to start a talk, to give a talk today on one thing that I am quite passionate about. And I hope that it is a very interesting element for you. It is for me, network security in the healthcare, in particularly dealing with zero trust practices. I hope we can do this as a forum. So I definitely don't have all the answers to the problem we have at hand. I probably have more questions than I have answers, especially because this is quite a big thing. So I hope to be able to interact and actually to get as much insights and ideas from you rather than just me talking a lot. But again, it's a webinar, so that means that I have to talk a little bit, and then after I talk a little bit, we can interact. But during the talk, if you feel or if you want, feel free to send messages either through the chat or even open your mic and go through, and it'll be a pleasure to address them as and when. Great. So that's a little bit about me. My name is Tiago Viana, and I work at the University of Gloucestershire. I am a senior lecturer in computing there, and I am currently the academic course leader for two courses that we run at the university. One, which is a brand new course that we started this year, is our Masters in Health Technologies. And the other one is our BSc, so I'm also the course leader for our BSc in Digital Forensics. I've been working in a lot of places for quite a long time. Been working in several universities in the UK and outside of the UK, as well as in the private sector, in the industry, and in academia. I'm the chair of the committee, as you've just seen. And this is my email, so feel free to contact me whenever, and whenever you want to talk about anything computing related or about any of the things that we do. I'm more than happy to interact with any of you. Feel free to drop me an email whenever. Great. Now, that's everything. That's the whole talk. I don't need anything else, just this image. Okay. So this image represents the most common problem in network security. Okay. And the most common problem in network security is exactly this image. And you might be thinking, oh, it's delicious. Yeah, at this time, I'm hungry. I really want to eat. And you're showing me this very delicious chocolatey thingy, which is super good. So that's actually to A, hopefully bring you to the talk, and B, to demonstrate the most common problem in network security. This is by far the most common problem in network security. And usually when I show this image and I ask people, what do you think this problem is? A lot of people think, oh, it's the bridge. Yeah, well, yeah, there's a bridge, but that's not the main thing that this image shows, and not the main thing that I want to talk about with this image. Yeah, obviously, the bridge is the consequence of the problem we have here. The bridge is just a consequence, okay? And this problem is this: the soft inside and hard outside problem. The most common problem we have in network security is a lot of people, what they do is they make a very hard network security perimeter and a very soft and squidgy inside in the network. So you usually have a lot of rules to enter the network, and you divide the network into the part that you trust, the part that you do not trust, and then you have a hard set of rules and metrics and stuff in the outside of the network, trying to prevent an outsider from getting into your network, while your inside is quite soft. Once you are in, you're a trusted device, and I trust you, and you can have access to pretty much everything or almost everything. You might be thinking, maybe that's not how I do that. Maybe that's not how the company I work for do, and so on and so on. But I would say, I'm not saying that's not the case in your company or where you work and the way you work, but I would say think twice. Maybe you're still using, or some companies are still using the same idea. Maybe your outside is just larger and your inside is just smaller, but there will be quite likely an inside part of your network that's soft to a point where this is the highest level security zone or whatever, and a device that is located in this network has access to pretty much everything or a lot of things, or many, many things, and so on. The problem with that is that, if you don't like to eat the border or the hard side, and if you are as clever as a child, you can do this, yeah, and you can literally stick your straw in the middle and get all the delicious chocolate that is inside. So, and this is a very common network security problem, the cake problem, I call it. So you have the soft inside, which allows attackers to go straight into the softy, squeegee part, get information, and run away without having to deal with any of the hard outside, the perimeter security elements that you have put in place. And this happens through so many ways. A trusted device can be a victim of an attack, of a malware, click on something that should not have clicked, and so on and so on. So many threads and so many attack vectors, as we know. And the problem is, again, the moment that trusted device is infected or is a victim of the attack, that trusted device will normally, most of the times, spread this to as many areas as it has access to. And this is, again, a very common network security problem. So you put such hard infrastructure in the outside, and because the inside is not that secure, you have this problem, and you can get your very precious chocolate filling stolen from you, and you're left with just the outside, which is, quite delicious, but obviously the chocolatey thingy inside is what is most important. There you go. And this is one of the reasons why zero trust has been proposed, as it has been proposed for many reasons. But one of the reasons, in my opinion, that zero trust came into place was to deal with this problem, the soft inside, hard outside problem. Zero trust is newish, though, it has been created in 2010. So you might think, 12 years, not that new, Thiago. Well, in networking, 12 years is quite a good, newish period. But the important thing is that during those 12 years, there have been so many discussions of what does zero trust means, how do we do it, how we implement it. And then, although we have had 12 years of it, we're still trying to understand what is this and how we do it. And zero trust means so many different things to many different people. So maybe, and apologies for that, what I'm going to talk about zero trust here is not necessarily what you think it is. Hopefully that's not the case, but again, I would like to have these as a forum, as a discussion, so we can have as many people interacting and engaging as possible, which hopefully we can then maybe bring some definition to what zero trust should be, and more importantly in the healthcare scenario. But again, it means so many things to so many people. But in a wider mindset, if you think, let's try to agree on something. In a wider mindset, a lot of people agree, thankfully, that zero trust means removing the inherent trust from the network. Again, classical network design will have these, I don't trust what is after this device, this firewall, this router, this access control list, or whatever. I don't trust what comes after this, and I do trust what comes before this. So we usually have these: do not trust this IP address, trust this IP address. Do not trust what is in this security zone, trust what is in this security zone. So you have this inherent trust in the network, followed by a set of rules. The idea of zero trust is no, do not have inherent trust at all. Do not trust, don't trust anyone, okay? Treat everything as hostile, and instead of, you are trust by default because you're part of this area, you are hostile, I hate you, you are my enemy, and you need to gain my confidence, and I have to trust in you before I can allow you to access something, before I can give you some connection, before I can trust you to do something. So hopefully a lot of people agree that, in a wider view, that's zero trust. In a zero trust security model, again, maybe your view is different, but to me, in a zero trust security model, we usually will have those main elements here. All network traffic on the inside is not trusted, as I said before, and we're going to be verifying everything. So it has a huge focus on verifying. A good example, for instance, is, we go to the airport, we pass through the first security layer, They check our passport, they check our boarding pass and so on. And after we pass through it, we're trusted. No one asks for our documents and so on. And this is nice for us because then we can just move around, go into a shop, in and out of a shop, and so on and so on and so on. But, it can be a problem security-wise, because if we are a thread and we have overcome the first security layer and we're now trusted because we already have shown our passport and it worked, we've shown our boarding pass and it worked. Now everyone trusts in us and we can board as and when. Now this would be, a trust scenario. I've been to some countries, which I don't want to disclose where it is, where it was very interesting because literally every place I entered, they asked for my passport. I went to a shopping place to eat a sandwich, and before entering the shopping place to eat my sandwich, they asked for my passport, they asked for my boarding pass. I went to the toilet and I've been asked for the same. And so many other very inconvenient places that I have been asked to do that. It was incredibly annoying to me, but they did a super zero trust protocol, so they were constantly verifying me to make sure that I am who I claim I am. And the good thing about that is, one layer might have missed something, or might have not realized one of the problems of the thread, and the second layer, the second time I'm verifying it, I can spot something that I missed before. And this is one interesting thing on Zero Trust. It also focuses on monitoring all communication. So everything that's happening is being monitored. Again, I don't trust anyone, hence I'm monitoring everything. Another good principle about Zero Trust, which I quite like, is the encryption. Again, if I go back to my lovely fudge thingy, another problem why we have this is because of this encryption, right? Most of us, when we do network security practices, we do encryption of data in transit. So we are worried about implementing IPsec, about looking at the traffic and encrypting the traffic. But most of the time we forget about the data at rest. And then the data in transit is encrypted, but the data at rest, the data that is in the device, in the computer, in the router, in the switch, whatever, sometimes might not be encrypted. And, again, this is a problem because this can let people do exactly that. You see, my transit is hard, but my at rest is soft and squidgy, and then attackers can get hold of it. And again, the focus is on protecting the data, protecting the assets, data, services, whatever is important for me in the network. NCSC, so the National Cybersecurity Center, has what they call the 10 principles for Zero Trust. And in the NCSC website, they present those 10 principles. The idea is that you should know your architecture, you should know every single thing that's part of your network. And this seems quite logical. Obviously I should know everything, Thiago, in my network. Obviously, if I am going to implement security policies, I am going to know everything. But sometimes we don't really know everything. Sometimes we focus too much, again, on the external. Sometimes we focus too much on the devices. Quite often when we do, traditional network security things, we are way too much focused on devices, and sometimes in services, and we quite often forget users, or sometimes we focus on users, devices, but forget services. And sometimes we might miss something. So the idea here is make sure you have everything, in your mind. When you design, you're thinking all possible users, all possible devices, all services, and this will be good. Another important thing is to create a single strong user identity. The idea of Zero Trust is in verification, and I would love to have verification as part of the Zero Trust process. And to do that, I need a single strong user identity. Passport. A passport is a single strong user identity. I need to have something that I can strongly identify who is the device that's trying to do this, who is the user trying to do this, what is the software trying to do this, what is the server trying to do this. So I need a strong user identity and a strong device identity. Some solutions that I have seen using Zero Trust use the idea of who are you, what MAC address are you using? What IP address are you using? What time of the day is it? Is this a common activity for you? Is this a common behavior for you? Is this a common behavior for the role you play at the moment? And all those things are put together to create a very strong and interesting user device identity. It's hard, but it's quite good. Authenticate everywhere. So again, constant checking, constant checking, constant checking. Know the health of your device and services, so monitoring. Which again goes to the next bullet point, focus on monitoring devices, services. Create policies according to the value of the service and the data. So if this is a very valuable data, be careful with that, protect in a different way. If this is a very valuable service, protect in a different way, and so on. Access control of every service and every data. Again, this is the difference. You see, in traditional network security strategies, we usually focus on perimeter control, controlling the areas. The idea of Zero Trust is that we are focusing on the services and the data. What do I need to access these services? What do I need to access these data? Don't trust the network, obviously, including the local network. When we say don't trust the network, we literally say don't trust any device. And last but not least, choose stuff designed for Zero Trust. Now, before I continue, I can see a question from Dr. Sorry if I mispronounced the name, Shibu Nai. A great question, and this is something that we're going to be discussing hopefully when we go through it. But this is the biggest challenge, which is optimizing, right? I think we have three elements that literally hate each other: security, usability, performance. The more security I add, I will make usability less nice. And I will also make performance less nice, because the more checks I have, my performance will decrease. There is no other way. It's essentially what it is. The moment I add security, I will definitively decrease usability. It will be slightly more annoying to use because I have more security checks. And it will be slower because I have more security checks, which is a big thing. Go back to my example of the passport. You see, it's super nice to only show the passport once and then do whatever you want. It's incredibly annoying to be asked your passport to everywhere you go, including the toilet. Again, can tell by experience. Cannot disclose the country, but there you go. But for in their perspective, in the perspective of the person who is receiving me, which is the a foreigner in their country, let's say. They feel more secure, and they are checking me every time. So it's annoying, it takes longer. Nevertheless, it's more secure, safer for them. Now, your question is great, because your question is, how do we optimize this speed? And I'm going to talk about some things as I go through. And there are several things, AI, data mining, caching, some things that can be used, redundancy, load balancing, some things that literally can help with it. But the moment I add extra security checks, it will run slower than no security checks. And sadly, there's nothing, or there's little I can do. I'm not saying nothing, to the best of my knowledge. Now, again, continue, and we can go back to this topic later if needed during the discussion, during the Q&A, which is the most, the best part. I'm sure talking at you is not the greatest part, but there you go, it's a webinar. Now, traditional network models are what we call perimeter network models. In essence, we have different perimeters. This is public perimeter, this is internal perimeter, this is secure perimeter, super secure perimeter, super secure perimeter. And we divide the network in layers, essentially. That's what, that's the traditional approach. That's the traditional approach. You have several perimeters, and you go through the perimeters. And again, it's like building walls. It's like, a castle, where you have, the first layer of the castle, then second layer, third layer, and so on. And the king is in the innermost part, the throne room, which is the most protected room. But again, it's, a wall over a wall over a wall. And the moment you pass one wall, you are inside enemy lines, or you are inside the castle, or you can start, taking the gold away from the castle. Zero trust is completely different, as I said before. The idea of the perimeter is building those walls. This is trusted, this is not trusted. If you have passed this wall, I trust you. If you're not passing this wall, I do not trust you. The idea of zero trust, as I said before, is I throw the towel, I give up, and I accept the reality that bad guys, enemies, attackers are everywhere. I tend to say, and definitely this is not, I'm pretty sure I wasn't the first person to say that, but I'm just going to say, I tend to say that there are two types of companies, the ones who have been hacked and the ones who have been hacked and don't know yet. And I have a strong feeling that I might be right, or this statement might be true, might hold true. Again, I don't think I was the first one to say that. I'm pretty sure I wasn't. But I'm also fairly confident that is quite likely to be true. And obviously, when we say hacked, we don't literally mean, destroyed, ransomware, stealing data, leakage, and so on. There's so many different hacking or, attacks that could happen. But, we are in a world where attacks are literally everywhere. Again, most of the attacks, they don't really happen, like someone rushing through the door, destroying the wall, getting into it. The idea of having walls to protect you is, thinking that the attacker will try to get through the wall. And, maybe in sci-fi movies, you can type 3 letters using HTML and hack into the Pentagon. Maybe in sci-fi movies. In reality, it's quite hard to go through the wall and bypass network security perimeter base on an offensive through the wall. It's super hard. It's not that easy. So what most attackers do nowadays is, let me go back to my cake, is this, right? So they drop something in the inside. They drop a malware, clickbait, phishing, try to get through the email of a staff member, clickbait, as I said before, URL attacks, malware, spyware, off you go, off you go, off you go. Dropped inside the wall, it's like, trying to throw an arrow through the wall, something like that, and hoping that's going to hit someone. And when it hits, then it becomes an insider threat kind of thing. And that's the idea of zero trust. Bad guys are everywhere. Don't trust anyone. You do have cases where you have, espionage and things like that. But there you go. And the idea is that all hosts are treated as if they were internet facing, and the network they reside is considered as always hostile, as I said before. In the zero trust architecture, you have 3 main components: user or application authentication. Obviously, as you know, we can have a user using the network, but we can also have an application requesting, doing the classical, request, response, publisher, subscriber, whatever framework you use. But you can have these different and several different components in your architecture. But you're going to have a user or an application using your network, as well as you're going to have device or devices using your network. So the idea of zero trust is, how can I make sure this is the user I can allow, not trust. Trust is not a word here, or actually it is, but in a different way. How can I make sure that I can allow this user to do what the user is trying to do? How can I make sure I can make this application do what the application wants to do, or this device, and so on? And this is all achieved with a trust score. So essentially, the idea is that I do not trust you by default. I will trust you based on every single thing you're going to do. Back to my airport example. You want to go to the toilet, show me that I can trust you. You want to go to the shop, show me that I can trust you. And that's the kind of thing. So a trust score is calculated every time you're trying to do something. And every time you're trying to do something, is this really you? Is this the right application? Is this the right device? Should I trust you? I calculate the trust score. To do this operation, you need to have a trust score of this much. If you have reached the threshold, I trust you. If you didn't reach the threshold, I do not trust you. And obviously, there can be many and several policies for different agencies, for different users, for different applications, for different devices. Usually, we have 2 main elements: a control plane and a data plane. And the data plane is where the users, the application devices are. And the control plane is something that can be centralized, can be decentralized. So going back to the brilliant question that Dr. Nai asked, you can have decentralized control planes, you can have load balancing, you can have redundancy, and off you go to try to optimize the speed. But this control plane is asked, I want to do this, I want to access that. Here is who I am, here's the application I'm using, the device I'm using, can I do that? And this is calculated. And if you are allowed to do that, you're given permission, control plane says, yeah, feel free to go, you can proceed, or no, you cannot proceed. Now, again, this is the idea for traditional network. If my slides and my talk weren't clear enough, maybe an image can help us understand that. In a traditional perimeter-based network architecture, I have something like that. I have the internet and I have the layers. So it's like an onion. Internet, DMZ, trusted level, privileged level, and off we go. In the internet, I have untrusted clients. So that's the only level where I do not trust anyone. When I go to the DMZ, I start trusting some people. I might have a load balancing here, VPN gateways, and I'm starting to add levels of trust. And then I go to the trusted area. And again, I can have a private service, an app server running here and so on. And I might think, I might have some financial servers to work some important stuff. And I have a privileged area because it's going to deal with such sensitive data like financial data, credit card information, and so on. And I might have a privileged area here. Again, the problem with that is the layer approach. If there is a PC here that's compromised, and usually what happens in this layer is the inner layer can access all the others. So for instance, the trusted layer can access DMZ and internet, privileged, trusted, and DMZ and internet. So most of the designs are like that. The innermost you can access the outermost, essentially. So the problem here is, if a device here is contaminated because this is the highest privileged area, then I can easily spread my ransomware, malware, whatever, from the privileged area into the trusted, into the DMZ, and obviously, throughout the company. And that's the problem with the traditional network security approach. In the zero trust idea, or in the zero trust architecture, I don't care where you are, I don't care who you are. I have a control plane with things that will be in place there. And essentially, it doesn't matter who you are, where you are. Whenever you want to do something, if you are a remote employee trying to access the private service, you talk to the control plane. What do you want to do? Control plane will analyze who you are, what you're doing, and so on. And quite often, attacks will show a non-expected behavior or an outlier, you see. Usually attackers will behave in a non-expected way. So they will be running, let's say, for example, in a reception desktop, trying to access high privilege stuff. Well, very weird. Why this is happening? Or, I don't know, someone that works in the marketing department trying to access the IT management department or something like that. So usually malware, viruses, they will try to do a behavior that's quite often different. And the idea here is exactly that. You see, it's to analyze the behavior, who you are, what device you're using, what app you're using. Is it a common time of the day you work on? Even things like that can be used to create a strong user application identity to certify that I'm really talking to the person that I'm talking to. So the authentication mechanism here. So you always talk to the control plane, and the control plane either allows you to do it or does not allow you to do it. And you can have even a secure gateway for legacy devices and so on, which is something that's quite helpful for healthcare, as we're going to see in a few minutes. Apologies, I drink quite a lot of water. But there you go. So the idea, as I said before, we have this supporting system known as the control plane. It's going to do this control activities, coordinates, configures the plane. And this is something interesting, right? So the control plane not only can provide the clearance, you can proceed, you cannot proceed, but the control plane also can adjust the security rules adaptively. So the idea is, you create access control lists, as an example, you create access control lists as you go through to enable, to disable rules and so on. So it's an adaptive system, which is quite interesting. Yeah, all the requests are made through this control plane, and then they are authenticated, authorized, and so on. Obviously, if you want, you can do a fine-grained policy, and you can have different types of access to access more secure resources, strong authentication to some things that you require more authentication, or a stronger authentication, or a higher trust score. Some other things that are not so important in your network, you can require a less or lower trust score, but still you need to prove, and so on. And again, if the control plane has decided that you can proceed, you can proceed. So it's not perfect because you still have the control plane, so the control plane can make mistakes, but it's slightly better than the traditional approach, in my point of view. And as I say, the control plane can coordinate, can configure, maybe create a tunnel, create an encrypted VPN, an encrypted tunnel between the requester and the resource, or create a one-time use credential key, one-time used password to give you access just that one time, which is quite interesting in my point of view. Now, again, I got a great question. How do we optimize this? Or how does this work? I truly believe, and I have seen some solutions using that this is quite interesting when we use data analytics to support machine learning. When we use machine learning, data analytics, AI to support this, to me personally, that's when it gets quite interesting. That's when it gets quite useful. Data analytics can act as an enabler and also as a supporter for zero trust. Again, if I can do behavioral analytics, I can realize, this is the common behavior. This user is authenticated. This user is using a MAC address that's known by me, an IP address that's known by me, a geolocation that makes sense and matches the IP, the MAC address. The role of this user enables the user to do this. And at this time of the day, this user usually behaves like that. So great, I can give this user a higher trust score, and so on. So behavioral analytics. And also this can be integrated in something quite interesting. And I know people who are into cybersecurity, especially network security, probably have heard, used, and so on, which is CM, seeing so many different pronunciations to it. CM, security information and event management, which essentially, is this idea that my network is generating so many logs. And if I'm monitoring the network, I can see what's common, what's not common, and then, bring those log files, these monitoring files, make correlations between them, and make alerts and say, oh, this is not really something you should trust because this is really different from the usual, and this is not correlating with regular behavior, and so on. Great. Now, I've talked about zero trust in general, and I've talked about, very briefly, data analytics and how it could be used to help us. And I strongly believe that's a good way forward, zero trust wise. And I'm not alone on that one. Now, this talk has a mixed kind of approach, right? So zero trust, but specifically on the healthcare. If network security is tricky and complicated in other scenarios, it is twice, 10 times, 100 times more complicated in the healthcare, for many reasons. If I go back to, again, the brilliant question I got, optimization time is a big one. Healthcare is an area that you cannot be slow, that you cannot block devices that are critical, that have an incredible, critical infrastructure kind of thing. So that makes everything super complicated. But on top of that, is one of the areas where you need security the most, because it's literally life-threatening. So we have a huge problem. I said a couple of minutes ago that three things hate each other: security, usability, and performance. They absolutely hate each other. the moment I add security, usability will be dragged down and performance will be dragged down. Now, we have an area that don't care about this hate and that needs the three of them to work together. Healthcare needs security to be high, accessibility to be high, and performance to be high. It's very demanding, but there you go, it's healthcare, so they are taking care of our health. The main issues we have here and the main challenges we have in the healthcare, the first challenge is that, I'm sorry to say that many healthcare organizations still use perimeter-based security, which then obviously inherit all the vulnerabilities within it. So all this stuff that I just talked about and the problems on perimeter security also apply to the healthcare. And quite a lot of hospitals, organizations, places that I know about, they use perimeter because perimeter is essentially the norm for most people. And all this stuff we said is true in the healthcare. I'll give you a very well-known, infamous example, which is the WannaCry, which though I know it's from 2017-ish, but again, it's a perfect example. Security on the perimeter, one machine, outdated, got infected, almost was a nightmare for the NHS. And we know, or the ones who have heard about the WannaCry, probably it's quite a common thing. So I would assume, if not everyone, the vast majority here have heard about the WannaCry attack. It almost was really, really damaging for the healthcare. And one of the reasons was because of the security on the perimeter. Again, if I can infect one of the so-called trust devices, then it spreads quite quickly. And again, in the healthcare, in any company, if a threat or a malware, an attack spreads, it's going to be bad. In the healthcare, it's super bad for many reasons. But on top of that, we have yet another challenge in the healthcare, which is the fact that many healthcare providers, vaccine developers, healthcare stuff, are using vulnerable, outdated legacy systems. Again, back to the WannaCry example, one of the reasons why the attack was, or nearly was, successful was to do with the fact that they were using an old version of Windows, as an example. And then a lot of people think, oh, but very simple to solve this problem. You just need to update. Why don't they update? Why they were using Windows XP and so on and so on and so on. But again, easier said than it is done. An MRI scanner and all the devices are super expensive. By the time the UK government buys them and distributes them across the hospitals, chances are these devices will be outdated. As we know, a device 3 years old is probably more prone to attacks than devices 2 years old, 1 year old, and so on. Obviously, the older device, more prone to attacks it will be. And this happens with very expensive medical equipment. They are very expensive, and hospitals, especially NHS, public healthcare, cannot afford to be replacing very expensive devices that often. And that's a problem, and it's a huge problem. Also, on top of the legacy systems, you have limited medical devices. So you have devices that are old, or devices that are outdated, or running outdated systems. And you have even worse, you have devices who have no system, or they cannot be controlled, or they cannot be managed by network administrators. They don't have this capability. They have not been built for that. And then again, it's a huge challenge for network administrators. And it's a challenge for any network security approach, including zero trust. And obviously, if a cyber attack is successful, it could be detrimental and affect life, health, patient care, and so on. Pro-Tenors in 2020, they have released a report revealing that the numbers of breached patient records and pay attention to this one, due to attacks from within, from inside the network, precisely the problem we are discussing here. In 2019 was over 3.8 million, which was up 26% from 2018. And this is just attacks from inside. Again, the, hard on the outside, soft on the inside problem. I found a slightly more recent stuff, and then 10 healthcare data breaches have been reported in 2021, impacting over 22.6 million patients in the US. And I just realized that I forgot to add one thing here. Yeah, I forgot to add one thing here, but I think I'll need literally a second, because I was writing an article for the BCS. So it'll be released hopefully at some point. And I was writing an article for the BCS, and here's my fault, so my bad. I did update on the report I write, so BCS has asked me to write a report on it, and I wrote on the report, but I forgot to put it in the slides. But bear with me a minute. Yeah, there you go. So the Proteinous Bridge Parameter report has highlighted that over 50 million patient records have been breached in 2022. So that's the most recent data I have. So over 50 million patient data has been breached in the world, based on the Proteinous website. Obviously, this is what we know about. That there might be so many more. But again, it's a big thing. Again, as I said, problems come from a diversity of things, including the diversity of the devices in the healthcare, MRI scanners, other devices, outdated, blah, 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 blah. On top of that, you have different workstations, the receptionists, clinicians, technicians, IT. In the UK, we have yet another layer of complexity. You have the NHS, and then the NHS is divided in trusts. You have the NHS Gloucestershire Trust, Oxford Trust, and there you go. So many different trusts, and each trust is different. The NHS uses a score that they call the HIMSS score, and the HIMSS score tells how digitalized the trust is. And then you have trusts with a very high HIMSS score, and trusts with a very low HIMSS score, and each trust is completely different. And we have had a seminar on that last month, and Dr. Mark Bailey from the NHS has demonstrated how, sadly, some trusts still use paper. Believe me or not, some trusts use paper-based systems. But there you go. And on top of that, you have NHS Digital, which is another team, NHS X, which is another team, and off you go. So it then becomes even more complicated. Very good question again from Dr. Ney. If there's a regulation standardization for the appropriation of medical devices, to the best of my knowledge, in the NHS, not that is satisfactory. Again, we go back to what I'm saying right now. Each trust is different. In the UK, we have the NHS, National Health System. If for some reason we have to put an off from the UK in this webinar. So the UK has the NHS, the National Health System, and then each trust is independent. So again, the trust in Gloucestershire is independent from the trust in Oxford. They are managed by different people, and they have the chief clinical informatician, which usually is a role of this person that oversees clinical informatics, which includes a bit of hardware and software and digitalization in the trust. And that's to the best of my knowledge, again. And they put in place policies, Dr. Nayan and everyone, for that trust. So I do know of trusts who do have that, the regulation on upgrading medical devices. And I know of trusts who are still trying to get by with paper documents. I know of trusts where, how do I put it? Where patient record is or may not be saved in their OneDrive account. But there you go. May or may not. But even for the trusts that do have that, the problem is money. You see, even if you have a regulation that says after 5 years the device has to be upgraded, great, where's the money? We have devices that are incredibly expensive, and this is a big challenge. Now, great. We do know what zero trust is, the idea, the challenges, and we can see the problems in the healthcare. How do I put the two together? And that's the challenge. And I don't have the answers. I'm afraid I have some interesting hints. I definitely don't have the answer. I have the hints. I have hints. One thing I do know, and I have seen it happening, is that a big challenge, the biggest challenge of them all, is the first bullet point, is convincing people that they need to care about that. And that's, trust me, the hardest one. So, managers, people who actually make the decision, often they see the tight security as hindrance rather than benefit. And this is a problem. On top of that, there are some people who are skeptical about zero trust. They say, just new stuff, it's not going to work. And they want to go to the traditional. Those two are, let's try to bypass them. They are arguable. We can try to argue. We can try to convince. The third one and the fourth one are the main problems. Accidentally blocking communication from medical devices could be critical. This is the biggest challenge, certainly. When we go back to zero trust and the idea that you have to ask the control plane, and the control plane makes the decision if you should proceed or not. If this decision is wrongly made, I might be blocking communication from devices which are way too important, and this can be a massive problem. As well as, again, more checks, delay, more checks, delay. And in some treatments, cancer-related treatments, you have a pathway, you have a time. It's very important. You cannot delay, and off you go. A day can literally be fatal. Now, I've been researching on it for quite a while now. I have a couple of papers in the area, but I've been researching on it, and I found some solutions, some works on the area, in the area. And I have found so far, again, there might be more, but to the best of my knowledge, what I have found is this: microsegmentation, proxy servers, firewall clustering, virtualization, and other research to try to address zero trust in the healthcare. Microsegmentation is this idea of literally splitting my network per hosts. It is not the perimeter-based idea, because the perimeter-based idea, you have an area. The idea of microsegmentation is that you go to the individual element level and you split your network into individual hosts. And the boundaries are not in the area, in the network area, but the boundaries are on each individual thing, individual PC, individual switch, router, MRI scanner, and off you go. And then you can create boundaries. When we do that, the advantage of doing that is that you can separate outdated and vulnerable systems from everything else. So in that case, you can segment the network using a zero trust approach, and then leave the outdated and vulnerable systems in one way and segment them and prevent it from infecting other areas. That could have prevented the WannaCry, for instance. And the idea is to have security policies on strong identities, individual workloads, and individual devices. And if the outdated are attacked, at least because they are microsegmented, they are individually separated, they are infected, they don't spread. And this is one of the idea. Obviously, this is interesting for legacy systems, because again, you put the outdated out of it and you microsegment it. But it's not easy to find the best location, how to separate, how to segregate. Some solutions are to, for instance, get the MRI scanner. Go back to get the MRI scanner and put a firewall in front of the MRI scanner, and then the firewall acts as a mediator between the rest of the network that is running zero trust and the MRI scanner that is outdated and so on. So you have to go through that firewall before. Problem with that, extra resources, extra management, extra problems, and ultimately I'm not protecting the outdated device. I'm protecting the outdated device to, if infected, spread. But again, no perfect solution. This is a solution. UTech, which is a paper, all these citations, I have the reference at the end, is one paper that discusses how to do that and so on. Another solution I found out there was a proxy solution. We have another paper from 2017 on that, on this idea as well. Oh, sorry, apologies. On that as well, with the proxy approach. And the idea is, instead of having a physical firewall, for instance, I could have a software or something that does a proxy. So I have not zero trust architecture here, a proxy, a zero trust network, proxy, and not zero trust stuff here. So things cannot talk to each other directly. They have to go through this proxy, through this zero trust network. Could be a software defined zero trust approach. And then you go through this application to get into there. And Gilman and Barth have talked about this before. I have another good question from Dr. Nair. How good it would be if someone could show any hospital management how vulnerable they're not with, and does necessary. Yeah, definitely, absolutely. I'm trying. Again, at the end I will show a link to one paper that I wrote on that. But there you go. Yes, it is a massive thing. So the proxy solution is good because it meets the encryption or communication element of zero trust. So the idea would be, that, I would go to the zero trust network and this part is encrypted. So this is not safe, but because things are micro-segmented and you have the proxy, they would not contaminate everyone. Performance load is reduced, but the problem is that it does not provide stateful inspection, because since this is running at software level, at application level, so I might be able, if we go back to the OSI model, the network OSI model, I might be able to look into application, I might be able to look into session, I might be able to look into things at the higher level of the OSI model. But if I use a physical firewall, I actually, am able to do a full stateful or a full state, inspection and look into lower layers like, IP layer or, the layer 2, layer 3 protocols and things like that. So this is one problem of the proxy. Attacks on lower layer could get through it, for instance. Another solution I found out there was a firewall clustering, and the idea of having, clusters of firewalls to microsegment, again, using physical firewalls and using redundancy on firewalls, again, in this case, to try to optimize speed, having more than one firewall to balance the load. And those firewalls would act as enablers to those old, outdated devices in the healthcare. And those firewall clusters would have redundancy and load balance on them, which is interesting. Here is an example. So this is a work from Juniper in 2020, and they did a very interesting paper on it, showing how medical devices could be protected with a clusters of firewalls, again, providing redundancy, providing load balancing, and so on, to protect those outdated medical devices from other stuff. And you would have, the rest of the zero trust network on it. So I'm just looking at the time. That is quite interesting. The problem is a bit of speed. So Hamilton did a very interesting work on the Juniper cluster and tried with deep packet inspection and without deep packet inspection. Obviously, the more deep the inspection is, or the deeper the inspection is, speed performance will be reduced. And the performance was reduced in 10% when the inspection was on a deeper level. And again, the problem with that is healthcare. 10% drop down in performance can literally be life-threatening. Yeah, there you go. Removing deep packet inspection increase the latency, so it makes it faster, but drop security. So I should be removing here, apologies. And removing the cluster increases latency. So if you remove the number of firewalls that it goes through, increases latency. However, can bring a single point of failure. And again, the other challenge with that, you have more devices to manage in the healthcare, and it's more expensive. But there you go. Another solution I found out there was with virtualization. So there is research out there from Kwon and other authors on doing microsegmentation using virtual servers instead of physical servers. So it goes a little bit on the software-defined networking area in a way-ish, but using virtualization and so on. And it is a good solution. So far, what I read in the paper was very interesting and it's very promising. But personally, I think it needs a bit more in-depth research on how these virtualization would talk and interact with legacy systems. To me, wasn't very clear how they did. Now we go back to great, Tiago. We've shown so many problems, but where is the solution? What now? And then it's the £1 million questions. To be honest, I don't know. I don't have the answer, but I do know, and I'm getting close to the end of my talking to you. Apologies, I'm nearly there. I know that the usual solution is not this, or in other words, I do not believe that the solution is a very perfect piece of the puzzle that you find somewhere and you put on there and it precisely fits the puzzle. I think that the solution is something like this, crazy piece that you need to adjust, because the problem in each hospital, in each health organization, in each healthcare organization is different. You won't find a perfect piece that, great, grab this, put in every single hospital in the UK, and it's going to solve the problem. I do not believe this is possible at all. I believe it's a very tailored solution to every single healthcare organization, which is not great, but it is what it is. So I believe that potentially, if we can combine some of the things I've shown and provide a hybrid approach with different ideas, finding the needs, constructing the best approach for the scenario, and then going through stages, because I believe in two things. I believe that the solution has to be hybrid for each need. And I also believe that the solution is made in phases. So for instance, if you grab this piece here, maybe you need to do this bit first. And when you're confident that this bit is working in your puzzle, you do this second part here. When you're confident that this is working, you do the next part and so on. And maybe this is a better way of convincing managers and hospitals and health organizations to implement it. And that's why I'm going to stop here. I've proposed this framework. We've called it the Net Health Trust. Okay, it could have been more creative with the name, but there you go. But the idea here is, again, that it is a series of stages that a health organization can go through if they want to implement zero trust. The idea is, what level do you want to go? Do you want to go on stage 1 base security, stage 2 login monitoring, microsegmentation, and here is a summary of, obviously the paper go deeply into it, and we did do a simulation on each one of those levels, and we did do some experimentation on it, and it was quite interesting. The results are there, and the references will be at the end of the slides. The idea would be, as I said before, so you look at the framework, you look at the stages, and you think what you can do, what works for you, what zero trust approach works works in the scenario you're dealing with. Great. Here are the references, including the paper I mentioned, which is this one. So Trust No One, a framework for assisting healthcare organizations in transition into a zero trust network architecture. It's a journal paper, and it's there. And all the other things that I have cited are here as well. So I'm going to bring the chocolate pudding back because it's nice, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm more than happy to take questions from the audience. Feel free to either open your mic, ask questions, or use the chat. I'm more than happy to go through your questions anyway. Feel free if you have any questions. If not, that's absolutely fine. I'm going to put my email in chat. In the meantime, again, feel free to open your mic if you want to ask questions, or to ask questions, or to drop a question in the chat. Also going to put the brunch web address here if you want to go through. And I'm also gonna, if you know anyone that's interested in that, I'm gonna put in the chat a link to our Masters in Health Technology. So anyone that is interested, or anyone that would like to go deeper into that, at the University of Gloucestershire, we have started a Masters in Health Technologies, and we go through some of those things in the course as well. Again, I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has via chat or audio. Thank you very much, Claire. That's really good to hear. Very good to know, Jennifer. Again, feel free to get in touch if you want, and more than happy to go further and deeper on that. Great. So if we don't have any more questions, thank you very much, everyone.